It was just another ordinary day at school when the announcement came over the intercom. There was an intruder on campus, and we were going into lockdown mode.
Lockdown, lockdown. This is an emergency alert. Please follow lockdown procedures. Go into the nearest room or building, lock the door, and turn off all lights. Wait for the all clear from school officials or local authorities. Lockdown, lockdown.
We were all instructed to lock our classroom doors, turn off the lights, and stay silent. At first, it didn't seem real. We had done lockdown drills before, but they always felt like a formality. This time, though, the fear was palpable. We could hear the sound of footsteps in the hallway and the sound of doors being forced open. We huddled together in the corner of the classroom, trying to stay quiet. These seconds felt like hours as we waited for something, anything, to happen. That's when we heard the screaming. It was coming from outside our classroom, and it was getting louder and more frantic. We all knew that we had to stay quiet, but it was hard not to be scared. The screaming eventually stopped, but the silence was even worse. We could hear the sound of footsteps getting closer and closer to our classroom. It was like they were right outside the door. And then, suddenly, the door handle started to turn. We all froze, holding our breath. But the door didn't open. It seemed like whoever was on the other side couldn't get the door open. The sound of footsteps faded away, and we were left in silence again. We stayed in lockdown mode for what felt like hours, until finally, the all clear was given. We were instructed to leave the classroom and exit the building. As we walked through the hallways, we saw the signs of what had happened. Doors were kicked in, windows were shattered, and there was blood on the floor. It was clear that something terrible had happened. It wasn't until later that we found out what had happened. An ex-student had come onto campus with a gun, intending to cause harm, but the quick response of the school's security team and the police had prevented any casualties. That day, we learned that school lockdowns are not just drills. They can be real, and they can be terrifying. But we also learned that sometimes, even in the midst of fear and chaos, there are people who are willing to do everything they can to keep us safe. I have a true scary story about a school lockdown that lasted for several hours and left everyone shaken. It was a cold winter morning, and I was in my last year of high school. I remember walking into the school building and feeling a sense of dread in my stomach. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just nerves about an upcoming exam. But then, just as the first bell rang, the announcement came over the intercom. We were going into lockdown mode. We all followed the protocol. We locked the doors, turned off the lights, and huddled together in the corner of the classroom. At first it was quiet, but then we started to hear something outside our classroom. It sounded like someone was trying to open the door. We all held our breath, not knowing what to do. And then we heard gunshots. The sound echoed through the hallways, and we all jumped at the sound. It was like something out of a movie. We had never thought it could happen to us. We could hear the sound of people running and screaming outside our classroom, and it was terrifying. We could hear police officers yelling, and then we heard more gunshots. The minutes dragged on, and we were all silently praying that the police would catch the shooter before anyone else got hurt. But then, we heard the most frightening thing of all. The sound of the shooter outside our classroom. We could hear him banging on the door, trying to get in. We all held our breath, waiting for the worst. But then we heard the sound of footsteps running away. The police had caught the shooter, but the lockdown wasn't over yet. We were instructed to stay in our classrooms until the police had cleared the entire building. It was cold and dark, and we were all huddled together for warmth. The hours dragged on, and we were all getting antsy. We had no idea what was happening outside our classroom, and we were all worried about our loved ones. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the all-clear was given. We were allowed to leave the classroom and exit the building. As we walked through the hallways, we saw the signs of what had happened. There were bullet holes in the walls, and things were knocked over. It was like a war zone. We later found out that a former student had brought a gun to school and had opened fire. He had injured several people before the police had caught him. It was a day that none of us would ever forget. We had all thought that school shootings were something that happened to other people in other places. But that day, we learned that it could happen to anyone, anywhere. And we also learned the importance of being prepared and staying calm in the face of danger. I have a scary story about a high school lockdown that had a bad final outcome. It's a story that I heard from a friend of a friend, and it still gives me chills to this day. It was a typical day at the high school, and I was in my math class when the principal came over the intercom, announcing a lockdown. My teacher quickly locked the door and turned off the lights. At first we didn't hear anything outside the classroom, but then we heard footsteps coming closer and closer to our door. They stopped right outside our room, and we could hear someone breathing heavily. We all held our breath, waiting for what would happen next. Suddenly, we heard a loud bang as someone kicked in the door. We screamed and cowered in fear as a figure emerged from the darkness. It was a man dressed in all black with a ski mask covering his face. He had a gun in his hand, and he pointed it at us, demanding that we get up and follow him. We were paralyzed with fear, unsure of what to do. The man grew impatient and started firing his gun into the air. Causing us to scatter and run in different directions. I managed to make it out of the classroom and into the hallway, where I saw other students running for their lives. I ran towards the nearest exit, but it was locked. The man caught up on me, grabbing me by the hair and dragging me back towards the classroom. He threw me to the ground and pointed his gun at me, threatening to shoot me if I didn't cooperate. I was terrified and didn't know what to do. I begged and pleaded with him, but he wouldn't listen. Suddenly I heard a commotion in the hallway, and the man turned his attention away from me for a split second. That's when I made my move. I kicked the gun out of his hand and ran towards the exit. I didn't look back, but I could hear the man yelling and chasing after me. I managed to make it out of the school and into the parking lot, where the police were already on the scene. They subdued the man, but it was too late for some of my classmates. In the end, 4 students lost their lives in the shooting, and several others were injured. It was a tragedy that shook the entire community, and it still haunts me to this day. The memory of that day will always be with me, and I'll never forget the terror and helplessness that I felt during the lockdown. It's a reminder that we should never take our safety for granted and that we should always be prepared for the worst.